Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my August wrap up. August was another weird month for me. I've been having a lot of those this year. I'm now officially unemployed and I'm looking for a new job. So that's a weird situation. Then there have been some other things going on. But I did manage to read quite a bit. I ended up reading 7 books, which halfway through the month I wasn't anticipating, but towards the end of the month I finished a few more books than I thought I would. And let's just go through them right away. I didn't prepare for this video, I should add, and it feels like the start of August was months ago, so hopefully I'll still have something to tell you about the books I read then. I'll try my best and we'll see how it goes. The first book I read in August was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, who is one of my all-time favorite authors. She wrote my favorite series of all time called The Wayfarer series, which is a sci-fi series. And this is also a sci-fi book. It is a novella, it's very short. It's only 138 pages, so it was a quick read. I ended up absolutely loving it, as I was expecting to, because Becky Chambers is my favorite author. This was a bit different than the Wayfarer series in terms of themes. It is about a woman called Ariadne who is a space explorer, and in this world, which is in the future, it is Earth in the future, there have been developments that make exploring new planets much easier because they have learned to use synthetic biological supplementations that can alter the human body. And Ariadne is one of those space explorers, and this is basically her letter to people on Earth, telling about her experience with her and her team exploring these new planets. And it is not about colonization, it isn't imperialistic in any way. These explorers want to be as kind to the planet they're exploring as they can be. They don't want to disturb anything. They don't want to disturb anyone, and it's so wonderful to read about that. As always, the characters in this are absolutely amazing. I love the characters that Becky Chambers writes. I really liked Ariadne, I liked her crewmates as well. I've forgotten their names right now because, like I said, it feels like the start of August was a long time ago, but I really enjoyed them. I enjoyed the relationships that formed between them. This is not very plot heavy. There is some plot, but it mostly focuses on the more philosophical aspect of what it means to explore new planets, what it means to be a guest on those planets and things like that. And I just had a great time with this. The next book I finished was the audiobook I'd been listening to for a while already in July as well, and that was The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is the 4th book in the Truly Devious series, but it's not really a continuation of the series. The first 3 books were very clearly a trilogy. They were all about our main character Stevie solving the murders and the mysteries of Ellingham Academy. There was one overarching storyline there, and The Box in the Woods is a new mystery within the universe, I guess. Stevie is again the protagonist, and she has now been enlisted to solve the mystery of the Box in the Woods set at a summer camp, and she goes there with her friends who we know from the first couple of books, and she tries to solve this mystery that took place in, I think it was the 70s or the 80s. So it's a very old mystery, but nobody has been able to solve it. And I really enjoyed this book. I love Stevie and I love her friends, and I think if this was the first book I'd read about Stevie and about her friends, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, because the mystery itself isn't anything that special, but because I have prior knowledge of these characters and of everything they've gone through, I really enjoyed reading about them again. I also very much enjoyed the setting of this summer camp, which is a great setting for a mystery, I think, and I loved seeing Stevie work her magic again, solving this mystery, because of course she solves it. It was fun to follow her figure it out. It was maybe a bit predictable, like I said, nothing all that special, but it was a very enjoyable read and I had a great time listening to it. The next book I finished was a reread, and it was Peaches for Monsieur le Curé by Joanne Harris. This is the 3rd book in a Chocolat series, which I've been rereading since last year. The series is about Vianne Rocher, who makes chocolates, and in the first book she sets up a chocolate shop in a town called Lansquenet-sous-Than in France. And in this book she returns to it, because the 2nd book is set in Paris, but this book is set again in Lansquenet, and she returns there because she has gotten a letter from beyond the grave. When there, she encounters all these new problems that weren't there yet when she left about 8 years ago, I think. As was the case with the first book, we follow both Vianne, who is our main character, but we also follow the perspective of Monsieur le Curé, Father Reynaud, and we get his perspective on things as well. And I think in the first book that worked really well, because then Father Reynaud was Vianne's adversary and it was interesting to see both sides, but with this book I really didn't like his perspective very much, And I also didn't really like this book very much, even though it was a reread and I really enjoyed it the first time. This time it was a struggle to get through and I was more annoyed than anything else. I still like the characters, but I think we didn't get enough of Vian herself and of her daughters, whom I adore. They were definitely background characters in this book, which I wasn't a big fan of. I didn't like the storylines with Father Reynaud, and within this book the main problem is that there is a new group in this town, in this very small town, and they are Muslim people, and there is kind of an opposition between the Muslim people and the Christian people. And I really didn't like that because it felt a bit awkward that a white woman was describing this problem and the way she approached it, because there was a lot of reflection on Muslim culture, on women wearing the hijab, for instance, and what it means to be a woman in certain Muslim countries. And I just didn't feel very comfortable with a white woman like Joanne Harris, who is from a Western country, really diving into this. I'd much preferred it if she hadn't done that, and instead if I'd read a book about that by a Muslim author. That felt a bit uncomfortable. I didn't really like that. And I also just didn't really like returning to Lansquenet in this matter. It felt like a way to repeat the first book with slightly different problems, slightly more modern problems, and I felt like I would have been better off just rereading the first book again. I did finish it. I did feel like giving up reading this a lot while I was reading this, because it's over 500 pages, which definitely wasn't necessary for the story this book is telling. But I really wanted to finish this because the whole point of my reread of this series was that I wanted to get to the fourth book in the series, which came out a few years ago and which I haven't read yet. So the point was reread the first 3 books and then get to the fourth book. But unfortunately, this book has rather dampened my excitement for the fourth book. I definitely will still read it, but I'm not sure when that will be. Next, I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is a very popular book on BookTube and Bookstagram and the bookish community in general. This is a story about Nora, who is not loving her life. She is very dissatisfied with her life and she has a lot of regrets. And then on the night that she dies, she is transported to the Midnight Library, which is a place where she can try out different versions of her life. Basically try alternate realities. She can live the lives she might have lived, basically. And I was very excited to read this because it is so popular, but unfortunately it fell a bit flat for me. I did enjoy it, but I didn't feel that connected to it. I really love the messages of this book. It goes into depression and it goes into regrets and how that's not a very useful way of living, and how you should focus on the future and live in the now and enjoy life, things like that, but a bit more eloquent than I'm telling you right now. I enjoyed that, but the story itself just didn't really work for me. I had a bit of a problem with how this idea of living the life she might have lived worked for Nora, because once she was transported to another life, she would be completely clueless about what that life entailed. She didn't know anything that happened before, so if she had a husband, for example, in that life, she wouldn't know who that was. She wouldn't know anything about their relationship up until that point. And I just didn't think that worked very well, because the whole idea about this was that she could experience lives she might have lived and be part of that life. If you're a stranger in your own life, how is that ever going to happen? That wasn't really addressed either, so I wasn't a big fan of that, and that concept kind of took me out of the story a bit. I also didn't really enjoy the characters. I thought the people in this book were very unkind to Nora, especially. Not all of them, by the way, but a lot of them were. I couldn't really connect to any of the characters, Nora included. It was an okay read, a classic 3-star read, which is also what I gave this book, even though I'm not providing star ratings in my reviews anymore. I gave this one 3 stars. So I definitely understand why so many people love this book and so many people have found solace and a lot of meaning in this book, and I definitely felt comforted after I finished it as well because of the messages it conveys, but for me the story itself just wasn't great. Nevertheless, I'm grateful that I read it and I did enjoy it. Next up, I read The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab, which is V.E. Schwab's very first novel. It was her debut novel in years ago, 2011, and then it was republished when she became a more prominent and a more popular author. I buddy read this with Kristin from Perks of Being a Bookflower, and we have yet to discuss it, but I think it will be great when we discuss it because it's always fun to discuss things with Kristin. So thank you for buddy reading this with me if you're watching this. The Near Witch is a fantasy story, and I thought when I went in that it was a middle grade fantasy story. I think I've heard V.E. Schwab describe it as that, but to me it felt much more like a YA, or at least a young YA story. I was excited to read this because I love V.E. Schwab's books. She is one of my favorite authors, and I was excited to see what she started with, what was her debut novel. I had fun reading this, but I have to say that I can definitely see that it is a debut novel, and I wasn't as invested in it as I've been in some of her other books. This is the story of Lexi, she's called, and Lexi lives in the town of Near, which is a place that doesn't really welcome strangers. They are a very isolated community and nobody really knows anything about the outside world. There is a myth within Near about the Near Witch, who was supposed to live generations ago and was then vanquished because she supposedly murdered kids. So it's kind of this story for children to make them slightly frightened. And Lexi tells this story to her sister as well, because her father, who has sadly passed away, told it to her a lot as well. But then children start disappearing within Near, and there is a stranger for the first time in absolutely ages. So people immediately suspect that this stranger has been taking the children, but Lexi doesn't trust what's going on and she decides to go find out for herself. And that's basically the premise of the story. There are witches in here, there is some magic as well. It's very atmospheric, it's really about nature, and it's set on the moors, which is always exciting, I think. This really just felt like classic early YA. It gave me Hunger Games vibes in the sense that it wasn't nearly as good as the Hunger Games, but about this girl who is slightly different from the other girls and who is all about nature and about exploring and about hunting, which is definitely Katniss Everdeen vibes. It's about a girl who really isn't supposed to go out on her own to find out what's been going on. She really should leave that to the adults, but she's doing it anyway. It was alright, it was fine, it was a middle of the road fantasy story. I thought that Lexi was a bit of a flat character. I didn't think she had that much personality to her. She was all that well developed. The same goes for any of the other characters, so I really would have liked to see more from that, to really see these characters shine, because V.E. Schwab is definitely good at that, but in this one it wasn't really there yet. And the story itself also didn't really grab my attention that much. I wasn't really that invested. The only thing that I absolutely loved about this was the writing. As is always the case with V.E. Schwab, I love her writing. I loved her writing in this as well. Okay, my battery is flashing at me again, so I'm going to go through this very quick. Next I read a Dutch book called Het Aanbidden van Louis Claus by Helena Hogenkamp, who is someone I know in real life, so I'm not really going to go into a review of this. I just want to say that I absolutely love this book. I think it's a great debut novel. It's very raw, it's very intimate. It really made me feel all the things, so I really can't wait to see what else she writes. So if any of you are Dutch or can read Dutch, I definitely recommend reading this. And then the last book I read in August was The Switch by Beth O'Leary, which I read on my Kindle, and I really love this book. I absolutely adored it. This is a story about Eileen and Lena. Eileen is in her 70s, I think, and Lena is her granddaughter who is in her 20s. Lena lives in London and Eileen lives in a small village in Yorkshire, I think. They both are not satisfied with their lives, so they decide to switch places. Lena will live in the village for a while and Eileen will live in London and see if she can have the adventure that she's always wanted her entire life. And Lena really needs to just slow down and have some quiet time. I loved the characters of Lena and Eileen. I loved both of their perspectives equally, which I don't really get that often when I'm reading books with multiple perspectives. But I loved reading about Eileen's life in London. I loved reading about Lena's life. I love the writing style. Beth O'Leary's writing is really funny. I got that in The Fletcher, which is one of her previous books as well. I always love books that are set in small villages, so this was that partly as well. There's also some love story going on, although I would have liked to have seen that come in a bit earlier in the novel. It got started quite later on in the novel, and I just had such a good time reading this. I was really in the mood for a fun read, for a not necessarily quick read, but just something to really enjoy and feel joy about. There were definitely some heavier themes within this as well, because Lena's sister has passed away from cancer. I got cut off by my battery being empty, so I'm now just finishing this video on my phone since it was nearly done anyway. As I was saying, the entire family is still mourning this loss, and it's a big part of the story, as is Lena's relationship with her mother, which I really loved as well. But like I said, I loved this book. I'd highly recommend it, and I loved finishing August off with this book. So that's it for this video. I am now going to charge my battery and then hopefully already edit this, because I'm going on holiday in a few days and I want to have this video up before that. In the comment down below, please tell me about what you read in August, if you've read any of the books I mentioned in this video, if you enjoyed them, Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future. And have a wonderful day. Bye!